Everyone, welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast. Now, today we have a very, very special guest. Our next guest was born in Nuremberg, Germany, and grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana. He served as Poet Laureate of the state of Indiana in 2018 to 2019. He became the editor of Poetry Magazine in 2022. Everyone, a big round of applause. Please welcome to the podcast, Adrian Matejka. Adrian, how are you?
Hey, what's up, Amanda? Thanks so much for having me today. Appreciate you.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're so excited to have you on the podcast. Been following what you've been doing for a while, and obviously, your newest role being the editor for Poetry Magazine. Great interest to so many people. So we're so excited to be able to talk to you today. But first and foremost, we got to get it out of the way. I ask everyone, where are you located? What's your GPS point? What's your latitude? No, I'm just playing. Where are you located in the world today?
So funny because I didn't know there was going to be a geography quiz, right? I am in Chicago, great city of Chicago. I just moved here from the mighty city of Indianapolis,
Yes.
where I lived for a very long time. So it's been
Absolutely.
quite a transition.
Yeah, I'm sure. So you're kind of so Chicago, Illinois, that's considered Midwest. Indianapolis, would you consider that Midwest too?
Yeah, it's all the Midwest.
Okay.
I argue with a friend of mine who's from Nebraska all the time because she wants to say that Nebraska is the Midwest. And I'm like, yeah, that's the West as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned.
Yeah.
Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, that's us. We're in the middle of the country. So,
Yes.
and being from a place like that, I don't know where you're from, Amanda, but being from a place like Indiana, where people just, if they know what it is at all, they have very little like real world experience with the place. I always feel like I got to rep my home state. So I'm also adjusting now to rep another place. And I tell you, I've lived a lot in a lot of cities, and I've never lived in a place that loves itself as much as Chicago does. Like the
Mm,
people here ride so hard for this city in a way that, no place I've ever been. I lived in Seattle and people were just like, whatever, right? But
yeah.
here, Chicago over everybody. It's like this whole culture of representing this city, which is beautiful. And
That
I'm
is
excited.
something. That is something that I know that's super exciting. Yeah, Chi-Town, definitely a place I would love to visit eventually. So tell us a little bit. Where were your beginnings at, Adrian? Were you born and raised in Indiana? And when did you discover poetry? Was it in Indiana or were you raised somewhere else? You transport to Indiana. Tell us a little bit about your background of how you found poetry.
Yeah. So my dad was in the military. So we lived in Germany when I was a kid. Lived in California. At one point, my mom told me lived in like 30 different states, but only
Wow.
for a little bit of time each, like 3 months here, 5 months there while they were bouncing. My father around trying to figure out what to do with them. And we ended up in Indiana, which is where my mother is from. So I found poetry there, but it wasn't until I was in college.
Mm.
Before that, I wanted to be a rapper, and I had zero flow whatsoever. This was in 1980, so really nobody had any flow. Everything was in rhyme. There weren't really illusions or similes like there are now. I mean, I remember thinking that Adidas was like the most luxurious brand possible. And you can
Mm.
imagine how that would play now. It just wasn't, the art wasn't as robust as it is, in 2022.
Mm.
So I didn't really start writing poetry until I got to college, and I wanted to impress a girl, and so I wrote a poem, but it was a really bad poem. And, it was, I didn't know what poetry was. I hadn't
Mm.
studied it in high school. I mean, I guess I read Where the Sidewalk Ends, or Dr. Seuss, things like that. I hadn't found Langston Hughes or Gwendolyn Brooks or any of the people who ended up being such great inspirations for me. You but I tried to impress this girl, and what I thought a poem was just all the biggest words I knew thrown together in some kind of shape, because poetry
Mm.
always seemed to me to be um, obtuse that way. It seemed to be something that I wasn't supposed to get. I wasn't supposed to have access to. So
Mm.
I imitated my idea of poetry. She thought it was cool, and that was the beginning of all of it. Now that relationship didn't last very long, but my relationship with poetry has been going pretty strong. It's like 30 years now I've been writing.
Mm. So the relationship with the girl didn't last, but hey, the poetry you got it.
That's
There we
right.
go. That's how you do it, right? No.
Hey, look, I was in there just well. I mean, I try to be careful because I've got a lot of self awareness. I know I have no game. You know, And so when I was doing this, she's like, "Oh, I like poetry." What a coincidence! I write poetry, but I'd never written a poem. So it was like one of these things where I had so little game that I didn't think ahead to realize that at some point I might have to produce a poem, since I just said that I wrote them. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that little bit of lying and
Mm.
and trying to spit game led to a whole life of wonder and hopefully humility now.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's quite fascinating to me because a lot of people, I would say a lot of writers, poets, they begin at a very young age, but for you entering into the field in college, college is, I guess maybe some people would consider that a late start. That could be your late teens or early 20s, wherever you kind of start college. So for you, it kind of ended into a late start. So tell us, how did it kind of then transgress into your career afterwards? How did that kind of transgress? From what age, from when you started to kind of the first hyphen in your CV? When did it then become poetry became your career?
Yeah, that's it's funny because I always thought that I was going to be run a bookstore. I worked at
Mm.
bookstores when I was in college. I was in a band too. I had all these kinds of ideas, but none of them involved being a poet. And then I saw a poet named Yusef Komunyakaa read, and listening to Yusef, I mean, and there's links everywhere to his readings and recordings. He's an extraordinary poet. But I saw him read, and it was like hearing somebody make music out of words. When I saw that, I was like, whatever he's doing, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So instead of
Mm.
thinking I'd just be like sort of this notebook poet where I'd write my poems and keep them to myself, that's when I started really seriously thinking about this art as something I might be able to practice as a career. Maybe not make money off of it, but have it be the center of my life going forward. So it
Mm.
was not that long after I wrote those first bad poems. It was probably when I was 21 or 22 years old. And I don't talk about this much, but I worked at a bookstore, this independent bookstore when I was in college. And then the first job I had out of college was working at Amazon. It was just starting up.
Wow.
So it was
Wow.
like 1995, something like that. It was just a bookstore, and it was a really radical bookstore. But
Mm.
in the 2 years I was there, it started to transform from being this revolutionary idea, like, hey, we can get books to anybody, any place. What a wonderful idea! Thinking about access and equity. That's what I was thinking about at the time, anyway. But they were thinking about money. And at some point, it shifted, right? So it was no longer about selling books. Then it was books and CDs. Then it was books and tires and bananas. And then it was like anything they could put a barcode on that could sell. And by that time, I'd already decided I was going to leave and go back to graduate school to try to focus on the art that we're talking.
Wow, wow. I think for a lot of people hearing that, seeing the kind of, well, seeing all the success you've had now, seeing that you worked at Amazon, but then decided to go back to school after that to then transgress even, I mean, to aspire even more. I think for a lot of people, that's something to hear. That's
Yeah.
really, I think a lot of people think the success happens overnight, honestly.
Oh,
Yeah, even
yeah.
in this
It's been a
2022.
long time. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is a long time coming. Well, and it's funny because I think that we all often have these moments in our lives where we face choices, and if we do one thing, there's the possibility of one kind of life, and if we do another thing, there's a possibility of another one. And I wanted to have a life that was centered in poetry. And if I'd stayed at Amazon, I would have had a life that was centered in capitalism. And I knew that that wasn't what I wanted to be or how I wanted to be in the world. But don't get me wrong, when I was in grad school eating top ramen every day because I was broke, I was thinking about how much money I would have been making if I would have stayed. And that was like, it was something that I had to reckon with. The version of me that would have been this wealthy capitalist living in Seattle, having that kind of life, versus the broke version of me living in Southern Illinois, studying poetry for 3 years, trying to figure out how to be a better community citizen and a better human being in the artistic world.
Absolutely. Adrian, I can really appreciate you saying that. I think a lot of people, they do get stuck on, they do get stuck in the same place for a very long time. I remember one of the best quotes I ever heard in my years of when I went to grad school too, during all the career counseling they attempted to give us. I remember probably one of the most memorable things I learned was a woman that came in, she's like a professor. Remember her saying, staying at the same position for too long, comfortability that's really going to stunt your growth. And I think that, you kind of really do display that with your trajectory and your path, like, hey, you can choose, sometimes you do have to choose, you could have chose capitalism versus, the love of your life, which is poetry, right? And writing, and really, you chose the road less traveled, right?
That's
So,
right.
it's
A lot
it's
less traveled, you know. Well, but it's
yeah.
funny because I mean, this is I remember my father who's passed away now, but we were talking about, he's like, "But you want to study poetry? That's what you want to do. You want to be a poet. What is that?" And I was like, you know what? I don't even know. I have no idea what it actually is, but I'm going to find out. And I think that that's part of the process of becoming an artist, is figuring out what that art means to you and how you build a life out around that art. And I've been very lucky because I was able to get a teaching position pretty early, so I could spend my summers working. I could spend my weekends and off days working in a way that, had I stayed at Amazon, I would have never been able to do. I can't do it now, my new job, because I'm Monday to Friday in a different way. We were talking about this earlier. Right? I
Mhm.
mean, the way that our careers, whatever those careers might be, impose themselves um, on us. It's, the poetry, painting, art making, whatever kind of art one is working in. That's the easiest. That's the thing that's most easily moved out of the way. So you have to attend to it. You have to attend to the fact that these poems need to be written, or these songs need to be created, or,
Yeah.
paintings need to be painted. Because otherwise, your regular job, whatever it is that keeps the lights on, is going to keep pushing at that work. And,
Absolutely, absolutely. No, you make such a great point. I completely agree. This idea of, and that's no matter what work you do, whether your work is outside the house, in the house, whether you're a parent full time, you're a doctor full time, you're a teacher, that work is definitely, it affects every part of your life. You know what I mean? And trying to crave into seek into other paths, it definitely does affect it. So it's always important, I think, to really think about that path that you choose. It affects every asset of your life. And it's a lesson I think I'm learning the hard way these days, right?
so how are you managing it? How are you managing doing this kind of work like we're doing right now, plus writing your own work, plus having a job? How do you manage?
Well, check him out turning the interview on me. Check that out. Check that out. Well, you know what? That's a good question, Adrian. Honestly, it's balance. You know what I mean? It really is balance. And it's for me, I think I'm managing it because it is the career path I have now. I came from teaching to now being a reporter. For me personally, it's I love what I do. You know what I mean? When I spent my time as an academic and as a teacher, I love that work to death. You know what I mean? And I will always see myself as a version of a teacher. And now, kind of as my new career being a reporter, it definitely is another method of teaching for me. So it's definitely, for me, I think it's that love of what I'm able to do. Like you said, being able to really find a way to make a career out of that, making money off of that to me has really changed the game for me. So it's definitely work, but it's definitely very fulfilling work, and it's very rewarding. So I find it easier. I'm working harder to balance both things, than obviously with, what I do with poetry. I mean, I love that to death too, but again, that's another form of teaching for me. So they all kind of intertwine with each other. So I find it easy to be able to balance them. Don't be wrong, the word easy may not be, but I find it, I'm willing to make it work in terms of balance. And, obviously your personal life, all those other great things. But let's turn it back to you. Speaking of balancing
No,
everything in
no,
the
it's
role.
really wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. No, no, it's like that. I think I figured out a very long time ago that to write the best poems that I could write, I needed to have a particular kind of life balance, right? I needed to be
Mm,
able to spend time uh, taking care of myself, whether it was going to the gym or playing ball or whatever. I
yeah,
needed to spend time with my family, and I needed to spend time with my art. And if I had those three things in balance, then I was okay. But
yeah,
if one of them got out of whack, then it would mess everything. So if I wasn't able to go to the gym for a couple of days, it would mess me up. Or if I was having a rough time with my kid or my partner, like then that would mess everything up. The poems weren't working. They all sort of feed each other in a particular
mm,
way. And when things get out of balance, or when things are upended, or otherwise dramatically changed because of a new job, or
yeah,
because of the completion of a project, that's a dramatic change, right? One of those things happens, and we have to reimagine that balance in our lives,
Absolutely.
and hopefully sooner rather than later. And so
Yeah.
that's the process I'm going through right now. Just finished the edits for my graphic novel and sent that out. I just moved to Chicago a couple months ago. I'm just got a kitchen table yesterday. You know what I mean? Just like little things, right? It's all
Yeah.
starting to come together in a way where hopefully on the other side of that there'll be some poems made.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I love that being able to kind of discuss that, because I think a lot of people think you just have these things stacked in place, you're good to go. No, life is too messy for that.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
the divine
And
creator was like, nah, fam, you're not gonna have it that easy. Come on now. It can't just be this bullet point list you think you got. So no, I
yeah,
think that's so important for people to hear, especially for aspiring poets, people that really want to be in the game in terms of writing, that it's okay that sometimes life gets messy. You know what I mean? That's the meaning of life. It's not going to look perfect, and you do have to balance, and you have to figure out your own balance. It looks different for everybody. So no, I love
yeah,
that we were able to have that moment to moment. So
yeah.
let's go back to you, Adrian. You are now the editor of Poetry Magazine, one of the country's oldest and most prominent literary publications.
Hmm.
Please tell us, what does this position mean to you now that you are in this position, this role? And what does it also mean to be the first Black editor? That is something never seen before. Like I said, this is a very old magazine. What does this moment mean for you?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I've been trying to um, get my arms around it since April when I
Mm,
agreed to take the job. And this is poetry is the oldest English language journal in the world dedicated to poetry. So my first issue in October is going to be the 110th year anniversary issue. And it's already
wow.
done at the printer right now. And it's crazy, right? Like you said, I'm the first Black editor of this. 110 years. I'm the
Yeah.
first editor of color in 110 years, right? The founder, Harriet Monroe, was a woman. She's the only woman who's been an editor for the magazine. I mean, we've had my senior editor was a woman, like my assistant editors, like it's not in those positions, sure, but as head editor, it was just the founder of the magazine. So
Wow.
she was there, and the rest of the time until me, it was white guys, you
Mm,
know,
yeah.
and the work inside of it reflected that. It was
Yeah.
incredibly homogenous. It was exclusive. A lot of times, it was uninviting. And that changed. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that it changed. It started changing with the last editor. He was much more open, and so I don't want this to sound like I'm taking shots at the people here who were here before me. I'm just making note that it was an incredibly white magazine. In fact, when I was in it for the first time in 2012, I was the only Black poet in the issue.
Wow. Wow.
So, in 10 years, it's gone from having one Black poet in the issue to having a Black editor running.
Mm,
So a lot's happened. I'm really,
yeah.
and I'm proud to be a part of that transformation, right?
Absolutely.
Um, there's a lot of work to be done still. And so that's a really long answer to your question, but it's wild to be here. It's overdue to be here. Um, it's an incredible gift and also a challenge to manage
Yeah.
the long history of this magazine and to try to think about it as a place where we are welcome. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
we weren't welcome for a very long time. So one of the projects I've got going right now, you'll see it come. It's in the first issue. It's going to be in every issue. Is I'm trying to go back and interrogate this archive, this very wide archive, and figure out who should have been it, and publish them now.
Yeah.
Hopefully, people try to get them their flowers while they're still here, but some of the elders have already passed on. And, I'm still bringing them into the magazine because their work should have been there to start out with. So the first issue includes an incredible poet named Carolyn M. Rogers, who was from Chicago. She was a co-founder of Third World Press, which is the oldest Black-run literary press in America. And she was never in the magazine. So it was like one of those things where it's like, how can you miss this on so many levels? And so part of my mission, part of what I'm trying to figure out how to do is like, I can't rectify those erasures, right? I can't fix what should have been done in 1980, in 2022. But what I can do is make this magazine look like it should look to be reflective of 21st century poetics.
Absolutely.
So that's what my goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. As you're saying that, that reminds me of just similar to, Justice Khadijah on the Supreme Court now,
Right.
even though there's been other Black Thurgood Marshall, I believe, viewers, correct me if I'm wrong, Thurgood Marshall was the first Black Supreme Court justice. However, there's never been a Black woman literally from that conception till now. And, look at the contribution Black women have literally created the country, right? In terms of laws, voting power. I mean, you name it, right?
Right.
So it's very crazy, right? And it's an amazing moment, but it's also, how is this so long overdue? How did this happen? But in the same breath, it's Justice Khadijah, she has so much to do. Like you said, there's so much work to be done. It's not an easy task, you know what I mean? Being the first, or even trying to repair, like you said, giving people their flowers now, how do we fix those things? So, talking about that, as you're the first Black editor, first person, that space of your identity for you, you talked a little bit about it, but for you now, looking at this, what do you really see, you can do differently in the literary community through being editor of Poetry Mag? For you, what do you truly want to see change really actually happen? What is your kind of vision for that?
Yeah, I think it has to start with the magazine and the foundation. I mean, we have Michelle T. Boone is a Black woman who's the president of the Poetry Foundation. First, say another one, we're in here as first together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she's brilliant and has such a beautiful vision for how we might be able to use the resources at the foundation for outreach and support and amplification, of the community. And so my part of it starts with the magazine, but I'm also lucky because it's part of a larger foundation that's well funded, and we're able to share some of that work with the community. So I want to start with the things that I can control, which is what the magazine looks like and who's in the magazine, and how we carry that work out into the world and support the writers who are in the magazine, but also who are subscribers to it and readers of it and just general supporters of it. How can we amplify the work that they're doing? That's my first mission. It's like supporting the people who care about the art we care about. Even as I'm trying to do this thing we were talking about earlier, trying to figure out how to build out the archive of the magazine to look more reflective of what the magazine should have looked like the entire time. So in action, I think it begins with the journal. I think it begins with kind of outreach we can do with our resources. But then in practice, it means sustaining. Just doing it for a little bit isn't nearly enough. It doesn't take a year to correct institutional racism. It doesn't take 3 years. It takes 10 years to really transform a space so that that's no longer part of the language of the place or the action of the place, right? It takes a while and we're doing it. I mean, the foundation of the magazine look completely different right now than they did 3 years.
Wow. Yeah. And that's a short span of time in 3 years to really even change the foundation of something that's been around for 110. Oh, that's phenomenal.
You know what I mean? So this is a austere institution, and so you asked how I felt about it earlier, and I didn't. I should have also included that. I remember when I got the call, and I was I'm going to trust me with this. Have you read my poems?
Yeah.
Do you know what it is that I do out here? Are you sure? And so, but it was exactly what they wanted. They wanted a poet who had a particular kind of vision, and I think they understand that my dedication to our community and to building community, because that's what I was doing as a professor. It's what I was doing as Poet Laureate. It's just part of, I can't work, part of my work is trying to help other people work. And if I'm able to do that, I'm able to make space for somebody else. That helps me to make space for my own poems, because so many writers helped me. There were so many writers along the way who moved and didn't take up as much space as they could have to give room to my poems, right? And so I'm always thinking about trying to shrink myself in a kind of way. So if I move over a little bit, 3 more people can be on the bench with me. And just thinking about poetry in the same way I think about space.
That's amazing. I think that's a very fascinating thing. A lot of people, they would not say that. They wouldn't say, I think about shrinking myself to make the art, to really add to the art of what I'm doing. I don't think I've ever, because you know what? People really do kind of value the idea of don't shrink yourself.
Right.
Make yourself known in spaces so you'll have availability, you'll have chances and opportunity because you'll get missed over. But you feel like for you, so that's an interesting kind of thought. I'm wondering for you, do you find yourself, you want to extend, you're committed to your art form, so you're committed to poetry. You want to extend poetry versus extending yourself as a poet. Would you say
Exactly.
that's a description of what your working practice?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's
Mm.
because I was taught to be that way, right?
Mm.
My teachers were that way. They made room for me. They took time out away from their work to help me figure out how to be a better. My
Mm.
friends are this way. They're all amplifiers of community. And so one of the things that I've tried to work very actively at is, thinking that if I have a success, carrying the mindset that if I am successful, then that allows me to make room for other people and bring them in too.
Yeah.
So if I'm poet laureate, I'm keeping my foot in the door and I'm bringing in the performance community. I'm bringing all these people into the arts commission offices that wouldn't have been there ordinarily, but should have been. You see what I mean? And so
Absolutely.
every success I have is an opportunity to share that with somebody else. And I've been really lucky.
Yeah.
I look at I still get like overwhelmed when I see somebody with one of my books that I don't know. Like it's not my mom or my cousin or somebody reading it. It just
Yeah.
always surprises me. And
Yeah.
so um, I've been lucky. I got to eat. You know what I mean? There's plenty for everybody, but it can feel as if there's scarcity in our community because there is compared to other art forms. There's less funding in our community than there are for painters or for musicians, right? Because it's not as marketable
Yeah.
according like to booksellers. They don't think that there's money. But the fact of the matter is, in this moment, as you and I are talking, there are more poets writing. There are more poets practicing poetry and buying books of poems than there has ever been in the history of human beings, right?
Mm.
How can that be bad? This is like the golden age for us. There's
Yeah.
so many incredible poets doing work. We had my last book was up for the Indiana Authors Award. I was a finalist for it. And the other books were so incredible. Like I
Mm.
obviously, Ross Gay's book one is a book called Beholding. It's a book-length poem about Dr. J.
Mm.
It's like incredible work, right? But as I was looking at this list for the state of Indiana, the 19th state,
Yeah.
you know, uh, used to be the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. And I'm looking at this list, and it's just one incredible writer after another spread out across that state. It reminds me that this is a time, right? Poetry is thriving. And this is just the United States. I'm being like sort of myopic.
Mm.
I'm thinking about the United States. I'm not even addressing how many great writers are in Britain, Jamaica,
All over.
Brazil. You know what I mean? Like all over. There are writers killing it. Just every place right now. So
Yeah.
when I look at that, and I think that, I recognize the economic scarcity we're talking about. Like, you got to hustle, right? But at the same time, there shouldn't be a scarcity of leadership or space because there were so many poets and so many people engaged with our community, right?
Absolutely. No, that's a beautiful way to put it because that is so true. Yeah, right now I do believe I agree with you. There is a golden age for writing. There's so much. The world is definitely at chaos and turmoil right now. And if you think for a second that people aren't writing it down, it's very naive. People are recording their histories. People are recording the next, I always like to say people are recording the next Bible as we speak. You know what I mean? Because
That's what's up.
that's really what's happening. People
Yeah.
are going, times like these is when, the real, was it, there's a famous phrase I like to say from a poet I heard in New York, your words can turn girls and boys into women and men, call soldiers for, an army to begin a battle. People are really, really invested in writing and writing down everything that's happening right now. So I agree with you completely. There's so much space for so many different people to really be in leadership positions, to really, even just to tell their story. And it's very important that we really, be able to accommodate that and really give that. You receive, and then you must give back to the people, whether the people that gave to you or the people that never give anything to you. But it's just continue that cycle. So I can really appreciate that. Just nuggets of wisdom dropped by Adrian. There we go.
That just makes as you were saying that, Amanda, I was thinking about. I think that's one of the lessons that I learned anyway during COVID.
Mm.
I sat and I watched how we got, as a community, as a world, not just as a nation, sold out by the leadership in those spaces. A few places, like randomly, like Canada or France, where they were taking care of each other because they have socialized medicine, right?
Yeah.
A place like here, it was everybody for themselves, right?
Yeah.
And I watched my neighbors who, many of them were very selfish. Then others of them were really caring and trying to support each other, right? And it seemed to me to be this time where we might have been able to reimagine how we interact with one another as citizens. Might have been a moment where we could have recreated our relationships with, state and local governments, but instead the opposite happened. And we got more distrustful and more ambivalent to the suffering of the people around us. And that's not how it should be. Poetry, I think, expects us to be better than that. And it expects us to be more thoughtful. I'm not saying every poet is a good human being, because a lot of them are not. A lot of us are, I should say. But being a poet expects a particular kind of movement through the world. You're supposed to be paying attention. You're supposed to be writing things down. And if you're paying attention, then you can't help but notice the suffering of others.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And so I had high hopes for this incredibly destructive and traumatic time to flip into something that would be a little bit more caring and compassionate. And for some people it did. And for many others, they got more bitter.
Yeah, that's the nature of the world. Like I said in the beginning, the world is very messy. So you know what? I want to talk a little bit about you and your poetry collection. So you have a couple: Devil's Garden, Map to the Stars, Somebody Else Sold the World, and like you had mentioned earlier, you have an upcoming graphic novel, Last on His Feet. I'm so curious. We kind of have talked a little bit about it, but where do you truly kind of find the inspiration for your writing? Where do you truly look to your life to, especially with these titles? These are very kind of effervescent, euphoric. I mean, Map to the Stars, Somebody Else Sold the World. Where do you find the inspiration to write your collections?
I've been really lucky. Like we were talking about earlier, I've written 6 collections of poetry at this point, and each one of them, I hope, is different, and I hope is trying to work toward a different goal poetically than the one before it. Like I try to get myself decentered so that I can learn some new things. Every time I write a book, it feels to me like the completion of a journey of sorts. So when I finish that, then I'm in a new place and I'm a different person. And now I got to figure out how to write poems in this new place as the person I am at the end of that, right? And so right now I'm not writing poems very much at all, because I wrote Somebody Else Sold the World in a book called Standing on the Verge of Maggot Brain during COVID. Like I wrote them in 2020 and finished them in 2021. And so it was just like, all right, I need a minute to figure out how to go forward as a poet now. After I've just put all of this energy out into the world, I need to recharge and learn some new things. So that's what I'm doing right now, which makes this job great because I get to read poems all day.
Exactly.
And it allows me to experience different styles and perspectives, points of view that hopefully will eventually inspire and influence me as I'm going forward. The great poet Pablo Neruda said that a good poet can write a poem about anything. And so I've tried to have that as the center of my practice. Let's get back to your question. Sometimes I'm inspired by an image that I've been carrying around, or a historical tidbit, or the riff in a song. Sometimes it's something I saw on a TV show, might not even be connected to that. Like I've been watching the Sandman series on Netflix as also a fan of that graphic graphic novel series, and it had me think about all kinds of things. If you haven't watched it, it is weird, but it's appropriately weird for the books that it's based on. And so everybody should check that out. And so it's like one of those things that it inspires me to think about writing poems in a different way when I have this kind of visual narrative that someone's created that I didn't expect before.
For sure.
So the poems come from a lot of different places, but I think in the end, what it is, it's something that moves me in a way that I can't let it go. So whatever it is, I carry it until I figure out how it becomes.
I'm so curious for you, especially at this stage in your career. Do you literally just say, I'm going to dedicate 30 minutes to writing each day? How does your writing process actually look like? Do you do it from your phone? Do you do it from a tablet? Do you do it on pen and paper? What does your actual process? Okay, old school.
Notebooks. I can't do it on my phone. Like the writers in our program write on their phones all the time. I tried it for a little bit because I love the idea of using my notes and then going to my laptop and having what I'd written in my phone there. Love the transference of that, right? But I just couldn't do it. It does. For me, writing comes from a body place, so it needs to be movement.
Wow.
Typing with my thumbs doesn't give me this same kind of rhythmic intentionality that writing. I mean, I use pencils, like everything. All my notebooks are full of fragments of poems and ideas that are written in pencil. And so at some point, it's just going to degrade and they won't be there anymore. But right now they're there, and I like it better this way. So
yeah. I think a lot of people, that's very interesting to find out different people's methods. So you're definitely like, I like that movement. You need movement of the body as you write to connect with the words on the page. Now I think it's a very, very amazing, beautiful thing to hear. So Adrian, this is so interesting learning about your background, all the things you've been able to do. So, you're obviously you're an accomplished poet, educator, past poet laureate, and now you're editor. So tell me and then tell just the folks out there listening, how does one expand their career beyond just writing on the page, writing poems on the page? How do you kind of just expand your career to, putting poetry in these different avenues? I think even like, the random person listening to this, maybe they've never even, watched poetry, seen poetry, been around poetry, to even find out that someone could be editor of a poetry magazine may even blow some people's minds, whether it be a poet laureate, obviously, all those things. How do you expand, your poetry, your writing career to just beyond writings on the page? How did you do that?
I have a long time collaborative partner named Kevin Nyrider. He's the guy I went to graduate or to undergraduate. So this is 30 something years of us working together in the world. And so really early on, we realized that old idea of poetry, and I think a lot of people, well, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but young people often have a romantic version of what being a poet is. I certainly was like that. It's like, what you do is you just write poems, and you're in the world, man, and you're doing this whatever thing it is, and poems just come to you, and it's none of that.
Yeah.
It's none of that at all. And at some point, it became really clear to me that if I was going to try to center poetry, like build my life around poems, I had to have some side hustles. And so, working at the bookstore was one of those, that ended up creating different opportunities for me. I bartended for a while, and that gave me space to write. Everything I was doing, every job I chose up to a certain point was just to give me room to write, keep the lights on, make sure I got food, and write poems, It's not as easy as all that right now. It feels to me like this is a hard time to try to hustle. A lot harder than it was in the 90s when I was coming up. It feels like it's more of a bounty than there is now. But to build a life around poems, the first thing you got to recognize is you're not going to make any money off poetry. So you have to figure out ways to sustain yourself while you used to stay in the art. At a certain point, and I hope that this is okay for me to share, I got more money for the first reading I did after my book came out than I got for the book itself.
Wow. Wow.
The economy of poetry is complicated. There are people who make a gang off of this, and they sell a lot of books, they do a lot of readings, and that's really wonderful. And then there are other people who are grinders, and they get some readings sometimes, they keep things going with that money. I always imagined that poetry couldn't be kind of a perpetual motion machine if we build it properly. So you do reading that pays your rent, give you space to write for a little bit, which then maybe gets you other opportunities to do readings or to publish someplace where you might get a check. Like we pay for everything we take for Poetry Magazine. We also get something like, 5,000 submissions a month.
Yeah.
And so we take like 0.001% of what we get. It's not just because there's so much. Right? It takes us forever to get through it. And so many beautiful poems that we wish we could make room for, which is part of what I'm trying to do, is just also expand the space of the magazines. So, so I don't wander off too far from this. The key to creating a life in poetry is figuring out how to have the art as the center while also doing something else that supports you, whatever it is. And the easier it is to leave that where you found it so you can go back to writing, the better. Like when I was bartending, that was a great job because I did not care about it when I wasn't. And I'd get, come home with cash. So it made, and it was my writing schedule at that time was working late morning to early afternoon, and then I would go into the bar and get ready for the evening shift. So kind of a perfect job, except for that, it's also something that you can't do for your whole life. That staying up late like that's not. I go to bed at like 10 o'clock. I couldn't do that right now. So, there's a certain point where I was like,
yeah,
you hit an age, and I don't remember what that age was for me, but I hit this somewhere along the line where I was like, why am I going to stay up late and be tired tomorrow? I'm not going out, but that's also because I'm 50 years old, So when I was young, it wasn't. So I think that so much of this is about trying to figure out what we can do as artists to support the art, and not expecting it to be directly connected. You and I were lucky because we were able to teach, which kind of keeps us adjacent to the art, gives you health care, gives you a good schedule, but those jobs hardly exist anymore. Like I tell my students all the time, it's like a 10% chance that they will get a job like I have because the universities are getting rid of those kind of jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hope that's helpful to someone. I mean,
no, for sure. I think it's definitely a realization for a lot of people. Yeah, it's there's no shame in doing a job that keeps your lights on to still pursue your passion. There's absolutely no shame in that. Like I said, like everything is not going to be this linear line in your life. You know what I mean? There's not even a straight line in your body. What makes you think the path for your life is going to be so straight, right?
That's right.
So
yeah. It's like, if I'm not mistaken, there's not straight lines in nature at all.
No, yeah, I don't believe so either. So it's why do you think the path to, however long you'll be in this universe, why do you think that's going to be straight as well? So I think you make a lot of great points, especially for a lot of writers coming up in the game and all those things. So, Adrian, this has been so great. As we're wrapping up, I do have some couple last questions for you. I want to know, when did you know that you were a poet?
That's a really great question because I don't think that I ever really thought I was. When I was a kid, I was always telling stories, and my teachers were like, he's too talkative and too daydreamy to be a good student. But it wasn't that I was talkative; it was the only way that I could figure out how to tell stories. I wasn't, tell like sort of to create the mythologies in my head and share them with people. I wasn't asking the kid next to me what we're going to do for lunch or something. I was always telling them stories, and kids are amazing storytellers. They're like the greatest mythologizers, right? They can't write them down because a lot of times they haven't learned the language, the written language, but they have the verbal proclivity, right? So for years, walking around with these stories in my head, trying to figure out how to shape them or how to share them. And at one point, after I busted out trying to be a rapper, and eventually became clear to me that the best mode for that storytelling was poetry. Poetry was the thing that told the stories and carry them in a way that writing an essay or writing an actual short story or trying to write a novel or something could not. Poems could hold the emotionalism of it and the imagism of it in a way that a story couldn't, at least the way that I tried to write a story. So I don't know, somewhere probably when I was in my 20s, I was like, oh, you know what, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know, but it was not before that, definitely.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You know what? Especially the point that you make with children. I think that's why I think a lot of people, there is an affinity, I think, for children's novels and children's movies because you have so many to kind of get into the mind of a child. They have so many thoughts, but like you said, there's no way to put down the language. And it is one of those things. Yeah, I don't know if that's a thought that I have that hasn't been fully fleshed out yet. But yeah, I think there is something amazing about children's working with children, children's work, children's writing, because they have so many brilliant ideas. But it's one of those things until you can really write it, unfortunately, we don't communicate with it. You know what I mean? I remember, like, I think truly every child is an artist until the world tells you to stop being one. Because
Right.
your imagination is running in circles so much. You have so many stories, you have so many things to say, so many things to do, but it's until we as adults, we tell children, no, it's not going to make you no money, just stop. And
Yeah.
you cut that part of yourself off. I mean, you really do.
Yeah. It's and you know and once that happens, and once they start learning those parameters for how to
Hmm.
be in the world, and they stop daydreaming, and they
There
stop
you.
daydreaming, then the poems get lost and the stories get lost. And
Yeah,
so, you know, I think about that all the time. I don't have time right now, and I got to figure out how to build that back into my life and my practice just to daydream.
yeah,
You know, just sit. Like, I mean, I'm so lucky right now to be in this city, and I'm always on,
mm,
going from the bus to the office, to from in the office to a meeting. But when I was a professor, I would have days between teaching. I'd be wandering around campus, sitting on
yeah,
benches, talking with people, and it gave me room and space. So I have to figure out how to build out that kind of same space as an editor, because that's when the best editing is going to happen. Right now, I'm still learning the job. It's got to be
yeah.
tight like this. But the best editing, the best writing happens when we give ourselves the opportunity to daydream.
Absolutely, absolutely. Giving yourself the opportunity to take space and for yourself, take that space for yourself. I agree completely. So, Adrian, I have one final question for you. This interview has been phenomenal. Tell me, why do you need to get your words out?
You know, I struggle with this because there's a particular kind of hubris to thinking that what I have to say matters to anybody else, right? And so when I think about poetry and I think about the language I'm trying to put out in the world, you know, words are representations, right? The representations of objects, the representations of ideas. Um, and if we mix and match the words properly, then they can become representations of emotions. They can become representations of psychic spaces. They can be representations of all kinds of things that they weren't individually. The table is just a table until you say it's a wooden table. Now all of a sudden it's starting to become an image. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Poetry is that thing. It allows me to not put out the words, but to put the ideas that the words create out of it. And so what I really am interested in is how to get those politics in front of people, how to get those ideas about compassion and about resistance in front of people, how to get the story of Jack Johnson back out into the world. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what poetry is for me, and that's what I got to do, is get the story out. You know, in this case, the best vehicle for that story is poetry.
Absolutely. All right. And he gave a very editorial answer. We appreciate it because he is the editor of Poetry Magazine. There we go. But that is why he needs to get his words out. But thank you so much, Adrian. This is an amazing interview. Please tell us what's 2022 and beyond looking for your writing, your work with Poetry Magazine now. Tell us what's that looking like, any ways in which we can follow you as well. So any socials, websites that we can follow you on.
Yeah, Amanda, this has been great. Thanks for talking with me this morning. You've given me a lot to think about. So I'm on Twitter more than I'm on any place else. It's just Adrian.Matejka. And then, Adrian underscore Matejka, excuse me. And then on Instagram sometimes. But like, it's a dad Instagram, so posting pictures of food and things like that. I don't really rock with it that much. The graphic novel is going to be the main thing coming up. Like I said, I finished that. It'll come back to me one more time for the final edits. I didn't say this, but it's the second half of a project I started with a book called The Big Smoke that was in 2013. I started this whole project in 2005. So when the graphic novel comes out next February, I'll have been working on this project for 18 years.
Wow. Okay.
You know, and so that's what it is. It's going to be the moment where I put that book into the world and set that story down and start a new one. I can't wait to see. I started working on a new script for a graphic novel that's about a kid who sees a rapper at a house party and decides he wants to be a rapper. In the 80s, of course, so it's a little autobiographical, but I'm sure, I hope I'll be able to elevate it to something more interesting after I've written it. But yeah, that's it for me. I'll work on some graphics, learn some stuff about poetry as the editor, but also as the reader and fan of the art that we both love. And figure out what's up with this city, Chicago.
Yeah, well, there we go. That's what's up. All right. Well, you know, everyone, if you are listening, Adrian's, the contact info and Adrian's social for his Twitter will be in the description box down below, as well as any more of his socials as well in the description box down below, no matter what streaming platform you're listening to the Poet Speaks podcast on. All right, Adrian Matejka, thank you so much for being a guest on the Poet Speaks podcast.
Thanks for making space for me, Amanda. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. And everyone, again, please check out all of Adrian's amazing work. Check out Poetry Magazine. Check out everything that he's doing. And please do check out the Poet Speaks podcast, available everywhere. All right. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.